Hello, welcome to my channel, or welcome back if you've been here before. My name is Beth Ann. Today I wanted to talk about this book, Pesticides, A Love Story by Michelle Mart. And the subtitle here is America's Enduring Embrace of Dangerous Chemicals. This is a fairly academic piece of writing. It's written by a history professor at Penn State University, and I got to hear her speak at a local event, which was pretty cool. So it is academic, but that said, it was very accessible. This is a cultural history of pesticides in the United States. And I just wanted to mention to lead us off that pesticides can do a lot of good in controlling invasive and rapidly spreading plants and insect pests. But they also cause a lot of damage, and they can cause damage to parts of the environment that you're not trying to target, and they can cause damage to human health. So one statistic that she sort of wraps up with is that in 2011, 97% of rivers in the United States were contaminated with at least one pesticide. So pesticides are everywhere, whether or not each of us individually chooses to use them. And her book is basically about why that's the case. So it's a cultural history of, she covers a little bit of basic history about how pesticides were developed and when that happened, but then the whole book is about how America culturally has embraced the use of pesticides and continued to use them even through various possible turning points where the negative ramifications of misuse and overuse became painfully obvious. So she has chapter headings such as, for example, Falling in Love, the Golden Age of Synthetic Pesticides, which was in the first half of the 20th century. Trouble in Paradise, the USDA and the Rise of Critical Voices. So as we got later into the 20th century, in the middle part, people started to criticize the use of pesticides more and more. In chapter 3, she covers the publication of Rachel Carson's Silent Spring, which was about the ramifications of DDT in the environment, because it's a long-lasting pesticide that can have a lot of effects on non-target parts of the environment, such as her bald eagle populations. And then she talks about foreign affairs, how pesticides people thought would be sort of a panacea for feeding the world, and were used in wars, such as the Vietnam War with Agent Orange. And then going into the latter part of the 20th century, the increasing critiques of pesticides, the rise of the EPA, chemical disasters that happened in the United States and abroad that had to do with the production of pesticides, and how even with all of that, still most people in the United States use pesticides regularly, especially in their lawns and in their lives. So it's very fascinating as an example of how even as scientific evidence is produced and even as critical voices come to the fore, something like these dangerous chemicals can still be so widely used. So she goes a lot into the media perception and handling of these pesticide issues, and the government's handling of pesticide issues. Throughout the book, she talks a lot about the precautionary principle and the idea that we sort of leapt into using these pesticides without having fully examined them first and investigated them and tested them, and how that still happens today because our whole system is set up such that the burden of harm is on the person who was harmed to show that a pesticide caused problems. The burden is not on the makers of the pesticides to provide evidence that they're safe. And so kind of everything that we've done is sort of done after the fact and backwards. We wait until a problem comes to light. We wait until people are hurt or sick before we go back and question the use of the pesticide. Many of the examples that she puts in here are sort of in the short term positive examples. So if you think about the publication of Silent Spring and the banning of DDT that happened shortly afterward, in part as a result of that, that's positive, but it also represents sort of a pivot where, yes, we banned DDT, which was a persistent chemical that affected non-target things, but in banning it, we went to other pesticide alternatives. So she repeatedly points out various times in recent history where we could have had a much larger cultural conversation about maybe this whole chemical approach isn't the way to go. maybe we should have a different philosophy and a different ethics around it. And at each of these turning points, we failed to sort of culturally have that conversation. And so with DDT, we got rid of this persistent long-term pesticide, but we switched to more acutely toxic versions that have their own issues and considerations. So it's just an absolutely fascinating look, because I feel like if you're kind of paying attention in environmental spaces, which I do as a biologist who's on the environmental science side of things, it's like all of the things she's talking about are sort of vaguely familiar. Like I've grown up hearing about all of these things, but to hear her put it in this fascinating historical lens of all the cultural moments where we could have changed our approach and changed our dedication, and every single time, or sorry, I don't mean our dedication, we could have, well, I guess we could have gotten rid of our dedication to pesticides, but every time one of those cultural moments arose due to something like the backlash against DDT or the Bhopal disaster with the chemical plant in India, every time one of those turning points happened, instead of questioning the whole premise, we would just go and find an alternative pesticide that seemed safer in the moment. So I just really, really loved that that lens of cultural history that she brought to the history of pesticide use in the United States. So I highly recommend this book if you're interested in this topic area. As I mentioned, it is written by an academic, and so it definitely has a little bit of that slightly drier tone, but I still found it very readable, just plop down in my armchair and read a chapter sort of book. So I think it's very accessible to plenty of folks without an academic background, as long as you're interested in pesticides and what she has to say about them. So I recommend this, and I'll see you all in the next video. Thanks. Bye.